Joining me on the channel today is Cathy Carr, author of 365 Days to Alaska, out January 19th from Amulet. It's a middle grade novel about a girl who grew up off the grid in Alaska and must adapt to life in the suburbs of Connecticut. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I always like to start at the beginning and explore your journey to becoming a published author. What kind of kid were you?
I actually did a little research. I dug back and looked at some of my old report cards, and I actually reached out to one of my oldest friends who has known me since I was just a small kid. And I think I was basically what you would call nowadays a geek. You know, I always had glasses, very thick glasses, back in the 70s when glasses were not considered an ornament. I like to tell stories. My friends remember that I had kind of a wild imagination, and I tended to do well in any projects in school that involved creativity. Yeah, I think that's about it. And, you know, I also I was outside a lot, like most kids my age were. We did a lot of that kind of thing.
The awesome thing about geeks is that they tend to be very interested in one or two subjects, or something really gets them interested. Was there anything that really interested you?
Well, I really liked reading, which I know we'll get to later. And I was homesick a lot when I was a kid. And one thing that happened is I would run out of stuff to read. So I would basically read anything I could find. So I think one of the early things that defined me was, you know, if I saw a book, I would dive in. It didn't have to be a kid book, or it could be a kid book. I mean, I certainly wasn't oh, I won't read that. But yeah, I mean, I think as an adult, I think most of my friends would say I'm someone who's interested in a lot of things and does a lot of off-topic reading. Like right now I'm reading a book about Neanderthals, and it's really good. It's fascinating, actually.
I love Neanderthals. Well, I love anthropology in general, and his human evolution and all of that. Give us the most interesting fact that you have about Neanderthals.
Well, by the way, the book is called Kindred, if anyone wants to look it up.
Oh, cool.
So, you know, right now what I'm reading about is, I just finished the section on how they made stone tools. I had never known how many different kinds there were, that some are harder to make than others, how you make them. You know, I never really thought about the fact that, of course, when the Neanderthals moved around, which they did a lot, they had to carry all the stone with them. Because once you found a good piece of flint or something that made really good tools, you know, you didn't just leave it. You took it with you. So, I mean, you're thinking about these people moving around with these massive hunks of rock. I don't know if that's true, if they actually did that. I'm not an expert. But that was something that kind of surprised me. And, you know, I think their technology was a lot more sophisticated than some people would think, you know. I think the thinking on them is really evolving quickly. So that's been interesting for me, you know.
Awesome. I want to check that out, because that sounds totally my jam. What types of books did you read as a kid?
When I was little, I was sick a lot, because I think what was going on is I lived in Wisconsin. And when I was an adult, I got diagnosed with the kind of asthma that gets triggered by cold weather. So, you know, basically there were winters when I was home sick more often than I was at school. And my parents both worked. And they, you know, it was kind of a different generation. These were not people who entertained their children. So it wasn't the kind of thing where they left me all these things to do. It was we'll see you tonight. Do your homework. And so I ended up just basically doing a lot of reading, anything that was around. And actually, I dug out this book I read when I was really little. It's The Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri. And here's one of my favorite illustrations, which I'm going to show you in a really sophisticated way. I'm going to hold it up to my screen.
Yeah.
This is the severed head of someone in the Inferno speaking to Dante and Virgil. That was my favorite illustration.
I like it. How old were you when you were reading?
Oh gosh, I was not old. I mean, I think I was like 10
Oh, wow.
or 9. So the way I did it is I would just like zoom through the books. And if something was boring, I'd skip it. If something caught my interest. So I can affirm that like in the Divina Commedia, hell is by far the most interesting part of the book.
Yeah.
I barely could deal with purgatory. And I don't think I ever read about paradise. So I thought that was the most boring thing ever. So that's how I did it.
Which I think confirms an ongoing trend on here is that authors, when they were kids, were really dark and were really goth. Loved the dark stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what's there to say about heaven, right? I mean, it sounds very pleasant. You're never sick there. What do you do all day? Well, you know, all of our imaginations kind of run short on that. Whereas like when it comes to hell, all of us can imagine things that would happen. So yeah, I mean, that's a good example of a book I read, really anything. And my mom was a librarian and she reviewed books for, I think, Library Journal.
Mm.
So there were also, you know, stacks of the books around that she was reviewing and I would read those. And one thing I will say about my parents is that, you know, they did not censor what I read. I never remember hearing, oh, you can't read that. That's too, you know, you're too young for that. Or you're too old for that. Shame on you reading that book. That's for picture book. Never. It was like, you want to read it? Go ahead. So I think that was a really good thing.
Yeah, definitely. And so what was your path from being a reader to wanting to become a published author?
Well, my friend who I consulted with about my childhood, who told me I was a geek, said that when we were little, I always talked about wanting to be a writer. But somewhere in there, I must have lost that idea because I do remember being in college actually, and, you know, starting to write papers. And I was noticing that on a lot of my papers, my professors were writing things like very well written, or I love reading your work, you know, so clear. And I was like, geez, you know, maybe I'm good at this. You know, because I was one of these people in college where I think, you know, there wasn't exactly a clear path for me. Like, okay, what am I going to do? You know, what am I good at? I mean, I'm interested in a lot of things, but, you know, that doesn't always necessarily translate into being good at something. So I think I kind of decided that writing was the thing I was good at. And then I started getting more serious about stories. I'd always written down stories, but I finally started finishing them. And really, you know, working on them and revising them. And then when I was in my senior year, I finally took some creative writing courses and, you know, did well. So like I got out of college, I worked kind of nothing burger jobs for some years and just wrote. And then I went and got my MFA. And I guess then I got my semi-official certification as someone who had signed up for the writing game, really.
And tell us about the day that you found out your book was going to be published.
Well, it was early April 2019, totally ordinary day. I'd gotten up, got my son off to school, did some cleaning up, went upstairs to my study, and I was working away in this like really nondescript sweatsuit that I wear when I write most of the time. And I got a message on my phone and it was from my agent. And she said, hey, I've got good news. Can we talk? And I was like, yeah. So she called me up and just to show that she actually is a keen student of human nature. She was like, I knew that they were taking it to the pub board at Amulet, but I decided not to tell you until they had made up their minds, which actually I think was the right decision, totally the right decision. I would have been tormenting myself, you know? So she didn't call me until she knew. She didn't say, oh, they're serious. And I have to be honest with you, I was so stunned and surprised. I mean, I remember babbling really incoherently and my agent sort of laughing and also sounding kind of nervous. I mean, know what I said. And of course I was totally home alone. So then after I got off the phone with her, you know, all the nuts and bolts. So they'll be sending the contract, you know, they're wanting this for an advance, but I think we can get this, yada, yada, yada. And then I just got on the phone and started calling people I thought would be interested, I thought would care about the fact that I had just achieved one of my major life goals at long last, you know? So yeah, that was a really good day.
How long had you been on sub?
Well, you know, with this novel, actually not that long, but it had been a long path getting into kidlit and getting an agent, you know. So quite a long time in there of wanting to get a book published. Actually, I think 365 Days got picked up right at the end of the first round. So
Oh,
I didn't even suffer the way I know a lot of people suffer. But you know what? I had a short story once that got rejected over 70 times before it got accepted for publication. So I know what it's like, definitely.
yeah, you're supposed to aim for 100. And even only 70 for a short story publication is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's gotten harder and harder. Just to show you, you know, how long I've been around. I have a friend who's a little older than me who remembers the days where he said, if you wrote a good short story, you'd send it out maybe 5, 6 times. Someone would pick it up, 10
Yeah.
at the outside. Now, of course, as you know, it's 30, 40, 50. 70 was my, but you know, in a way, I'm really almost grateful for those days because I think they did really teach me how to cope with rejection and, you know, have faith and be able to say, you know what, I don't really know what's going out there, but I think this is a good story. And I think if I keep sending it out, you know, someone's going to pick it up. So, but yeah, I didn't, you know, I actually was super lucky. And even though it got accepted at the first end of the rounds of subs, it's hard having a novel out there on submission. You've put so much time into it and so much effort that the rejections, you know, they do sting more, I would say. They're harder.
Yeah, and like people out there expect a lot of rejections. Like I hear some authors be like, "Oh, I just started querying," or no, they'll say like, "I've been querying for so long, like I have 20 rejections," and I'm like, "Oh, you sweet summer child, that is not, that is nothing."
Well, you know what I think part of it is too, and this is something that I get kind of upset about is, you know, when you go out and you start doing stories, not doing stories, reading up stories on the internet, you know, what can I expect? There's always that person who will post and be like, oh, I wrote my novel in a month and then I sent it out and, you know, 2 different agents wanted it. And then they, you know, I picked the best one and she sent it out and they got a bidding war and I got a 3-book deal. And I'm like, yeah, and there's a unicorn eating the acorns in my backyard. I mean, I'm sure things like that happen, but you know, for the vast majority of us, that is not what happens.
Yes, and I've been talking now to a lot of you now have quite a few interviews done, and it seems like on average it takes about 10 years of like deciding, okay, I'm going to really put effort into this publishing thing until you finally get somewhere with it.
You know, it's just such a chancy thing. I mean, you know, you can spend a lot of time on the wrong idea, you know. I mean, you can write a wonderful novel and then someone else publishes their novel, which is really similar to yours just before. I mean, there's so many things that can happen. So yeah, you know, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
And how did you find your agent? What was your querying process like?
Well, I was actually really, really lucky. Because I've been working with this woman in Austin, Texas, Bethany Hegedus. She runs the writing barn down there, and she also works with writers. So she was helping me out with a novel. I was very lucky I could afford to do that. And when she and I were satisfied with where it was, Bethany said, you know, I've got some people I think might be interested in this. And here are their names, and you can mention me.
Oh, nice.
Which, well, you know, wow, what an amazing act of generosity. And I'm sure it did kind of well, it probably opened some doors.
Mhm.
You know, no question in my mind. And I know cold submitting is hard. You know, it's tough. I have a friend doing it right now, and yeah, you really just have to suck it up every single day and get back on it. I mean, it does happen though.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
it's totally possible. Anyone watching out there to get an agent through cold querying, I did it twice. So
it's totally possible. And I've been assured of this by all kinds of people.
yes.
But, you know, yeah, that's where you're really going to have to suck it up. And, you know, like we said, have faith in yourself and your vision and what you're doing.
And what misconception did you have about publishing prior to being published that has now changed?
Well, you know, I thought about that question a lot. I suppose maybe I thought it was going to be like, you know, who was that famous publisher, Maxwell Perkins, and he takes Thomas Wolfe out for a drink at the Algonquin Hotel. And, you know, it's just very like, you know, you're our guy and you'll get the extra special treatment. I don't want it to, you know, sound like, oh, my publisher has treated me very well. But, you know, they have a lot of books and it's a business.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's a lot of hurry up and wait. And of course, once the book gets accepted, you just want it out there, you know. The other thing that actually really did surprise me about my publisher is it kind of reminded me of like what it might be like to move up from the minor leagues to the major leagues.
Mm-hmm.
You get recruited, you're in the minors, it's like, wow, what a shortstop, you know, she's got great hands. And then you get up to the majors, which is your publishing house, and they're like, well, yeah, you're really good at that, but we also want you to bat 350.
Yeah.
And we want you to start doing it now. And the revisions aren't done until, metaphorically, you're batting 350. So that was a bit eye-opening for me. I thought the standards were very high, the expectations for revision. I mean, luckily, you know, I feel like they were satisfied, but it was hard. It wasn't easy.
Awesome. What has been like one of your best revision suggestions that you've gotten along the way?
Oh my golly. Well, I can totally tell the story of my soggy middle, which was when, now this would be my agent, but I also had a lot of good stuff from Amulet. But when I was submitting Rigel's story to agents, I did notice from like the first 3 or 4 that, you know, they were kind of like, wow, the writing is really good. I love this main character. I love that it starts out in Alaska, this beautiful setting. But then all of a sudden, I'm kind of just dealing with this lonely middle grade girl who can't make friends in her new school. And it's not so exciting. And I feel like I've seen it before a lot. And finally, there was an agent, my current agent, who said, I'd like to see a revision on this, but you need to find some way to kind of, gee, what would be the right way of saying it? Kind of take that magic and that kind of sense of wonder and mystery that you have in the beginning and carry that through. You know, now one thing about my agent, she didn't give me any kind of specific suggestions because I think she knew, like most good, you know, readers know, like, look, I'm going to tell you what the problem is. You have to figure out how to fix it. That's not my problem. So that was when I had the idea, not to do any spoilers, of Rigel kind of starting to get a relationship going with this bird that's hanging around her elementary school. That's injured and it's staying in the back of the school so it can eat out of the dumpster. Oh. And that was kind of how I managed, you know, to kind of keep that sense of humor and observation and all of that carrying through. And it took some of the weight off of these nasty girls in her middle school who are making her life a living hell, which personally I feel is very realistic. However, it is true that it had been done before and something else needed to be gotten in there. And I did manage the revision and Rachel was really happy with it. And the rest is, you know, publishing history, I guess.
Yeah. So pitch your book. Tell us about it in your own words.
All right. I'm really bad at pitching. Let me think about this. 11-year-old bush rat, Rigel Harmon, has moved to the Connecticut suburbs, and they're as horrible as she expected. Yeah, that would be, basically the book is about this girl who grows up off the grid in interior Alaska, in this 2-room cabin with her family. No running water, no electricity, no telephone line, no roads, no neighbors, really the wilderness. And her parents get divorced, and her mom takes Rigel and her 2 sisters and moves them back to her home state of Connecticut to live with their grandmother. And Rigel loves her life in the wilderness, and she's also very attached to her father, and she doesn't want to go, but of course she has to. Now, what no one else in the family knows is that Rigel and her father have worked out a deal, which is if she can stick it out for a year in Alaska, he promises, if she can stick it out for a year in Connecticut, he promises he'll bring her back home to Alaska. And that's kind of where the title comes from, and that's the basic premise. And as anyone who's read a lot of fiction already knows, this very beautiful and simple plan the 2 of them have, doesn't work out exactly the way Rigel expected.
I love that it's about an off the grid, a kid growing up off the grid. And where did you get that idea from? Tell us more about that.
Well, for some reason, I actually have known a lot of people who tried that lifestyle or who were interested in it. And actually, even now, I have a very old friend from my university who spent most of her working life. She was a lawyer in New Mexico. And now her and her husband are up in Colorado, and they bought this old ranch, and they're, hunting most of their meat, and they've planted this big garden, and they're really trying to trim down their lives and simplify and see how far they can take it. And it's really kind of, cool and fun and interesting. Of course, some people don't get it at all. They don't understand why anyone would want to do this. And another thing I did know from knowing people in that community, and this is a little side note, but it helped me out, is I knew for whatever reason what high a percentage of those marriages, when they involve off the grid life, a lot of them do end in divorce.
So divorce is common amongst off the grid people.
It's really relatively common among everybody, right? But I think really with the off the grid lifestyle, you do get, and it's pretty natural, one of the partners who's like, okay, we've tried this enough. The kids are getting older. And the other one being, yeah, no, I'm not done, or I love this and I'm not, going anywhere else.
What's your favorite step? Is it drafting or revising?
Drafting is harder. I really feel when I'm drafting like I'm a spider, and you're like pulling the silk out and you're weaving, and where are you pulling the silk out? You're pulling it out of yourself. So it's very tiring, and for me, very slow. Revising is easier. I've done so much of it, and I think I do sort of feel like I know what I'm doing. So yeah.
And
drafting is hard.
Are you a perfectionist or a chaos artist?
I'm a perfectionist about my sentences. I do want my sentences to be right. And I'm one of these people who reads my sentences aloud, which means that it's really hard for me to write in a cafe or in a library. I'm muttering over in the corner. It does work for me though. I think that the sentences fit together the right way, and they have a, maybe not a musicality, but they kind of flow. But I am a chaos artist in the sense of, I'll follow a new idea or I'll stick something new in and see how it works. Definitely, for sure. I guess the truth is, one thing I'm kind of a perfectionist is I write realistic fiction. And so for me, I'm not going to have something in my realistic novel that doesn't feel realistic to me.
Mm-hmm.
For example, when I was working on 365 days, and as you know, trying to fix that soggy middle and get the right ending. And I had a couple of people suggest, they were like, Rigel should go back to Alaska, and she should have some kind of, big, tense adventure with her father, something physical. And I was like, how's she going to go back to Alaska? And they were like, well, she could fly back. And I was like, tickets are really expensive. Her mother's really broke. Her father's like he's roustabout working up in Prudhoe. Where's the money for this going to come from? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's not in touch with her father. What's she supposed to do? Take a cab from Fairbanks to their house? They don't even have a road. Let's say this just isn't something that would really happen, And I did find myself kind of getting a little bit stubborn I do find myself getting a little stubborn about those issues sometimes.
Okay.
It's like, just look, this just wouldn't happen. It's not believable. You got to have your son in the right part of the sky.
Yeah. So do you have a huge ego, or are you humble and demure?
Well, I had a vision and I wrote a book, and I want people to read my book. So, in that sense, I guess I do have an ego, and that there's a part of me that says, this is my little letter to the world. And I think maybe you should try reading it. I'm not sure whether besides that, I really have a huge ego. I don't believe that I'm like some, amazing talent or, gift to the world of literature. I work very hard. I practice a lot,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you a morning writer or an evening writer?
I wish I could be a morning writer. Now, I will say that one thing I've trained myself to do over the years, especially since I had a child, is I write when and where I have a chance to write. I don't do any of this, I have to write here, I have to write there. I'm even kind of strict about things like, I have to have a cup of coffee, because I'm like, it's my time. I've got 30 minutes. I'm taking the time. The early mornings for me are not a good time. And when I used to try to get up early and write, I would just end up sitting at the kitchen table and staring into my coffee cup for an hour while I was trying to wake up. So I would rather write late at night. My juices are going then. However, then I get all excited and stimulated and I can't fall asleep. So I don't know, maybe there will be a time when I write from 10 to 2. That would be a great schedule for me, 10 at night to 2 in the morning. But now I would say ideally my schedule is get my son on the bus, eat something, go straight upstairs and write until 1:30, 2 in the afternoon. And then I have an hour and a half to get stuff done and all that before he gets back home and things unfold. So, yeah.
Are you a plotter or a pantser?
So when I write, I definitely feel like I'm writing towards something. Now, that might not be an event. That's just like a state of mind, or a change in the main character, or a realization. I guess I'm kind of old-fashioned that way. Maybe sort of an epiphany. And then I will write an outline, which will, I'll get a piece of scrap paper like this, and I write 4 or 5 lines on it with my pen.
Nice.
And that's my outline, and it gets buried in all the papers on my desk, which I will not show you. But I do have that in my mind. But, to me, it's kind of like if you ever go snowshoeing in the winter and you're on a trail, but then you see something really interesting off the trail over there under a tree, I'm going to go over and see what's under the tree. Huh. And if that, if it's not good enough, maybe I go back to my trail. If it's good enough, then maybe I go off on this new path. So I certainly don't feel wedded to my outline, although I do feel, in a way, I kind of do envy the plotters, because I feel like they're probably more efficient, And I do feel like the way I write is not hugely efficient, but I'm hoping the next novel I will be more efficient because I'll have a better idea of what I need to do.
Mm-hmm. And are you a character first writer or a plot first writer?
Character. No, all the way. I have to know the kind of person I'm dealing with, and you know, truthfully, I mean, people have told me I write character-based fiction. So I think that really says it all, you know, and again, it ties in with the realism, right? Again, if you have a certain kind of character, this is the kind of thing that's going to happen to them, maybe not this. Not that there can't be surprises. But I do love plot, you know, I enjoy those kinds of novels that are like hugely plot driven. It just doesn't, you know, tend to be my own thing.
Mm-hmm. What part of a character do you need to know in order to like start writing that character?
Well, I know that there are a lot of exercises out there. Mm-hmm. When you know, what's her favorite food? What does she do for fun? Okay, so here's an example. The thing I'm currently working on. The person I was thinking about was my father, whose mother died when he was 4. And this caused him a lot of problems and anguish mm-hmm. in his life. And I realized kind of in a way, maybe what I'm doing is I'm like revisiting that, but I'm sort of giving my father a different outcome, a happier mm-hmm. outcome, where he actually is able to kind of deal with the fact that, you know, his mother's gone.
Yeah.
You know, I wish I could, and I have some kind of vague idea that the character is going to be kind of artistic. You know, she's going to want more than just kind of like, I don't know, sitting at the popular girls' table in her lunchroom. Not that I even think there's anything wrong with being a popular girl. It's just not her path. It's not her thing. Now with the Rigel, the character in 365 Days to Alaska, what I really think is interesting about Rigel, who really came into my mind, bam, like that, is one of my best friends, this guy who has known me for ages and knows me really well. When he read one of the first drafts, he came back and he said, "Cathy, you've finally written about yourself." He said, I didn't think you were ever going to do it, but you finally have. And some things are like, whoa. And then you're like, dang, I think you're right, actually, you know? I didn't do that on purpose, but yeah, maybe that is what I've finally done. So, you know, I think that part of it for me is really very mysterious. You know, where do I get these characters from? And now I'm trying to characterize the secondary characters in the current thing I'm working on. And again, I have to kind of have a person in mind. You know, are they like that old lady I used to work with in my library who was so lovely, but was just kind of really so tense and anxious. It was hard to be around her. You know, are they like that guy you meet who you think is really so great, and then at some point you realize that, you know, really he's not cracked, you know, what you thought he was. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, people are always interesting to me. And, you know, it does remind me of this thing David Sedaris said. He said, if you want to write about people, you have to be interested in people. And I've mm-hmm. always been really interested in people. Yeah.
Have you ever feared that you would never be published?
Yes, absolutely. You know, I mean, I had my stories come out in the little magazines that are associated with MFA programs, but I definitely felt like what I was doing was stuff that people weren't interested in. You know, as much as I like watching Game of Thrones and stuff like that, I knew that really wasn't what I was going to do and do well. And I just was worried no one was going to be interested in the kind of story I wanted to write, or that maybe it's like more that I'm compelled to write, you know? And I was very worried. And as a matter of fact, when I finally got my agent, I was preparing this list of publishers you could submit to without having an agent. That's how convinced I was that no one would ever take me up. Yep. True story. It doesn't stop me. I still keep trying.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was sort of my little safety net. It was like, it's going to be okay, because after all these agents have rejected me, look, I've got this long list of publishers I can submit to.
Yeah, that's great. Would you ever like to be famous?
Well, if you're talking about the kind of famous where you have drones flying over your house, or like, you know, people getting all up in your face because you drank a smoothie or you didn't drink a smoothie, no. I have no desire for that kind of attention, you know, none. But I mean, you know, I think that, well, once I read this book called Hans Brinker and the Silver Skate, that was published in 1865. And when I checked it out from the library, the woman who checked it out, I don't even know how I heard about this book, but I did. And I was like, I'm going to read it. And the lady who checked it out for me did it the old-fashioned way, with the stamps and the paper slip.
Wow, how long ago was this?
It was a long time ago.
Okay.
And she handed this to me. She said, "You've made this book very happy today." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because this is the first time this book's been checked out in 25 years.
Wow.
Which lets you know how long ago it was, because nowadays that would totally like be we're going through the library, we're purging the books, we're making room for computer labs and, you know, other things that our students, our patrons currently want. So, yeah, that's kind of cool. And I do love the idea. I do have this little image maybe of someone saying to a kid someday, I know you've moved and it's really hard. You know, here's this book I read a long time ago and I really liked it. And maybe you might like it too. And it'd help you kind of deal with what's happened to you.
Yeah.
I think that's a super cool idea. I like that idea very much.
Yeah. Random funny anecdote. I love looking on Google Books for like really, really old books, like, because they go and they scan like all these really, really old books. You can find things from the 1500s on Google Books, like scanned.
Yeah.
Right. But sometimes they also have the library cards scanned in too. And you can see like on there, like stamps from like 1908, you know, and crazy things like that. So that's a delight if you.
Yeah, I think that's totally pleasurable. And, you know, it does kind of make you feel like you really are part of this, you know, this community, like this chain.
Yeah. Lineage, if you, as it were.
Yeah.
If you could have any non-supernatural talent or ability, what would it be? Non-supernatural.
Okay, so I've thought about this very carefully. So first I was like, I'd like to be able to speak several foreign languages perfectly. But then I was kind of like, you know, Cathy, if you worked on it a little bit harder, you could learn to speak more of them competently. So, and then I was like, I'd like to get by on less sleep. But then I was kind of like, but I really like sleeping. And I really have all kinds of cool dreams. So I think what I finally picked is this. I would like to be able to play a musical instrument or several musical instruments really, really well. I'd like to wake up tomorrow and be able to go down to my piano and play it like Art Tatum.
Like it.
You know?
Interestingly, like someone yesterday also said the foreign language thing. And that was the first out of everyone that so I got 2 foreign languages in a row.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you could speak like, you know, Spanish, French, German, Russian, and then, you know, okay, if you're going to get ambitious, let's throw in Arabic and, you know, maybe Swahili and Urdu. And I mean, wow, you know, you could go everywhere and talk to everybody. I do think that would be really cool.
Definitely. What are you working on right now?
So what I'm working on right now, where I was before like COVID hit and I started doing, you know, remote schooling with my son, who basically needs me to be with him pretty much every moment he's in school. I was working on a new middle grade novel about this 12-year-old girl. She lives with her grandmother in this kind of typical little New Jersey town, you know, within striking distance of New York City, but really, you know, quite a ways away from New York City. And her mother deserted her a very long time ago when she was really little. And the girl acts like this doesn't bother her, but really it does.
Mm.
And, you know, her grandmother is a kind woman, but she's also kind of anxious and stuffy. And, you know, this girl kind of feels like all the exciting things happen to other people around her and never to her.
Mm.
And then there's a change in her life one summer, and all of a sudden she's dealing with like plenty of excitement, only not exactly what she expected. And that's really, you know me, that's really about as far as I've gone with this. I'm a little bit worried about it because, like I said, COVID has just thrown such a wrench in the works. But I can say, usually when I get this far in a novel, and I'm like 4 or 5 chapters in, I do tend to finish things. And I hope I do because, like I said, you know, I'm kind of thinking about my father when I write it.
Mhm.
So, you know, I really would like to pursue it and see where it goes.
Awesome. Good luck with it. Everyone, check out 365 Days to Alaska, out in January from Amulet. I put buy links below, and all of Cathy's Twitter and social media handles are below too. Thank you so much for being on the channel.
Thank you, Carly. I had such a good time talking with you.